Hmm. The morning my granddaughter was supposed to sign away everything we had built, I was sitting in the back of a car with a wool blanket thrown over my head. That is not how I expected to spend a Tuesday. I am 67 years old. I have buried a husband, raised two children, mostly alone after he got sick, and kept a small manufacturing business running for 31 years through recessions and a pandemic and every kind of storm you can imagine. I do not rattle easily. But when our driver, a man named Gerald who has worked for our family since my daughter was in middle school, grabbed my arm in the parking garage and said, "Mrs. Calloway, please, get down. Don't make a sound. You need to hear this first." I did not argue. Something in his voice. I have known Gerald for 22 years. He calls me Mrs. Calloway, even though I have told him 100 times to call me Ruth. He brings my granddaughter Lily peppermint candies from the bowl on his dashboard every single time she rides with him. He has never once in 22 years asked me to do anything except tell him where I was going. So when he said, "Get down," I got down. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding what that morning was supposed to be. My granddaughter Lily is 29. She has her father's eyes, my son Marcus's eyes, and her grandmother's stubbornness, which she would tell you herself if she were here. She took over the day-to-day operations of Calloway Fabrication 3 years ago, after Marcus had his second heart attack, and we all agreed quietly that the stress of running the business was going to kill him before 60. Lily stepped in without being asked. She learned the floor, learned the contracts, learned the suppliers. She is sharper than any of us were at her age. And 2 years ago, she met a man named Donovan Price. Donovan is the kind of man who knows exactly how to walk into a room. Tall, well-dressed, speaks slowly like every word he says deserves to be considered. He told Lily he was a private equity consultant. He told us he was looking to partner with mid-size manufacturers to help them scale. He told me, personally, at a Sunday dinner in my kitchen, that he loved my granddaughter and that he wanted to build something real with her. I smiled and passed him the bread rolls. I did not trust him. I want to be honest about that. I did not trust him from the first dinner, but I also knew that I'm 67 and stubborn, and I have been wrong before. My daughter-in-law Carol, Marcus's wife, I did not trust her either when Marcus first brought her home, and she has been the most loyal, steady woman I have ever known, so I kept my mouth closed about Donovan. I watched. I was polite. I brought him into our home, and I watched him the way you watch weather that might turn. For almost 2 years, nothing I saw proved me right. He was good to Lily. He showed up. He remembered things. My birthday, the anniversary of when my husband passed, the name of my doctor when I mentioned offhand that I had a follow-up appointment. He was present in a way that felt deliberate, and I told myself maybe that was just who he was. Deliberate. Careful. Some people are just careful. Then about 4 months ago, Lily came to me with an idea. Donovan had proposed a restructuring deal. He had found investors, he said, who were interested in Calloway Fabrication. Not a sale, he was very clear about that. A partnership. They would bring in capital. Lily would retain operational control, and the business would finally have the resources to expand the way my husband always dreamed it would. Lily's eyes were bright when she explained it. She had folders. She had projections. She had clearly been thinking about this for a long time. I asked if I could see the paperwork. She said Donovan's team was still finalizing the investor documents, but she would bring them to me as soon as they were ready. I said okay. I waited. The documents did not come. Every time I asked, there was a reason. The lead investor was traveling. The attorneys needed another week. One clause was being renegotiated. I am not a lawyer, but I ran a business for 31 years, and I know what it looks like when someone is managing your patience instead of answering your question. I started to feel the thing I had been sitting on for 2 years begin to push back up through my chest. 3 weeks ago, Lily told me the documents were finally ready and that the signing was scheduled. A Tuesday morning at the office of Donovan's attorney downtown. She asked if I wanted to be there. I said yes immediately. She seemed a little surprised, but she said, "Of course, Grandma, come." Donovan said nothing when she told him. He smiled and said it would be good to have the whole family there. I told Gerald on Monday afternoon where we were going the next morning. He nodded. He said, "Yes, ma'am." Then he said quietly, without looking at me, Mrs. Quietly, without looking at me, Mrs. Quietly. "Calloway, I think you should know. I saw something last Thursday that I've been carrying, and I don't feel right carrying it alone anymore." I told him to say it. He told me that last Thursday he had driven Donovan across town. Lily had asked Gerald to drive him because his own car was in the shop. He had taken Donovan to what Donovan said was a client meeting downtown, but the address was not an office building. It was an apartment complex. Gerald had waited in the car, the way he always does. He had the window cracked. He had not been trying to hear anything, but a man had come down to meet Donovan in the parking lot, and they had stood close to the car, and Gerald had heard enough. He heard the other man say, "Once she signs Tuesday, we file the amended operating agreement and her vote gets diluted to nothing. She'll think she's still running it." He heard Donovan laugh. He heard Donovan say, "She trusts me completely. This is done." Gerald looked at me in the rearview mirror when he told me this. His jaw was tight. He said, "I should have come to you sooner. I kept thinking maybe I misunderstood. But I've been up 3 nights over it, Mrs. Calloway, and I can't let that girl walk into that room tomorrow without you knowing." I sat in the back seat for a long moment. My hands were in my lap. Out the window, Marcus's street was quiet. I was going to his house for dinner that evening. I thanked Gerald. I told him he had done the right thing. I told him to drive. That night I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold, and I turned it over and over in my mind, the way you do when you are hoping you will find the angle that makes it less bad. There was no such angle. I thought about going to Lily directly. I lay in bed at 2 in the morning rehearsing the conversation. "Lily, I need to tell you something about Donovan." And in every version of that conversation, I saw her face. I saw how much she loved him. I saw how long she had worked on this deal. I saw her looking at me the way adult grandchildren sometimes look at grandmothers, with patience and love and a quiet assumption that age sometimes makes us see shadows that aren't there. I had no proof. I had Gerald's word. Gerald, who is the most honest man I know, but who is still just a driver to anyone who does not know him the way I do. I needed her to hear it herself. I called Gerald at 6 in the morning. I told him my plan. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you sure, Mrs. Calloway?" I told him I was sure. I told him to pick me up at 8. The parking garage under the attorney's building was dim and smelled like concrete and exhaust. Gerald pulled in at 8:47. The meeting was at 9. He had texted ahead to Donovan. Lily had given him Donovan's number months ago for coordination and said he was bringing Mrs. Calloway and that there was construction on the main street. They might be a minute late. Donovan had texted back, "No problem, we'll get settled. Just bring her up when you arrive." Gerald parked on the 2nd level. We sat for a moment. "His contact, the man from the parking lot," Gerald said. I looked him up after. "His name is Paul Renner. He's listed as the managing partner of the investment group." I nodded. "So he'll be in that room?" "Most likely." I looked out the window at the gray concrete pillars. A car drove past, slow, looking for a space. "If I go up there now," I said, "they'll just deny it. It'll be my word, your word. Lily will be confused and Donovan will be calm, and I'll look like an old woman who never wanted this deal." Gerald said, "That's why I thought if there was any way I know." I had thought the same thing at 2 in the morning. I need them to say it again, somewhere I can hear it, or somewhere it can be recorded. Gerald pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. It was already open to the voice memo application. I looked at him. He said, "I thought you might want this. It's legal in the state for one party in a conversation to record it, as long as that party consents." 22 years. He has worked for us for 22 years. "Donovan will come down to meet me," I said, "or call me to come up. Either way, he'll walk through this garage." "He's the kind of man who would come down," Gerald said, "to show he's gracious, to escort the grandmother personally." He was right. I knew he was right. "He'll say something," I said. "Men like that, when they think they've won, they can't help themselves. They want someone to see it." I got out of the car. Gerald handed me his phone. Small voice memo already running slipped into the outer pocket of my cardigan with a microphone faced out. We moved to a spot near the elevator bank, standing between two large concrete pillars. Gerald sent a text to Donovan. We're in the garage, level 2. Mrs. Calloway would like a moment before coming up. She's a little nervous about the stairs. Donovan replied in under a minute. On my way down. I stood there in that parking garage and I thought about my husband. He built Calloway Fabrication out of a rented warehouse and 2 employees. He worked 6 days a week for 11 years before he took his first real vacation. He used to say, "Ruth, the only thing that matters in business is who you can trust." I thought about how he would be here if he were alive. What he would say. What he would do. I thought he would do exactly this. The elevator dinged. Donovan stepped out in a gray suit, no tie, the relaxed confidence of a man who has already done the hard work and is now simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. He smiled when he saw me. "Mrs. Calloway, you look wonderful." "Thank you, Donovan." I let him take my hand. "I'm sorry about the stairs. My knee has been something else lately." "Don't apologize. We're not in any rush." He glanced at Gerald with a brief, dismissive nod. "Is everything all right? You're not having second thoughts, I hope." He said it lightly. "Joking. The way you joke when you are absolutely certain the answer is no." I said, "I just wanted to make sure I understood the structure correctly before I went up." "Of course." He tilted his head. "Patient. Generous. What would you like to know?" "Walk me through it one more time. What exactly does Lily retain after the signing?" He smiled. "Full operational control. Her title, her role, everything stays the same. The investors come in as silent partners. They provide capital, she runs the company. And the voting structure? A beat. Just a small one. Standard for this type of arrangement. The investors hold preferred shares, which gives them a say in major structural decisions. But day to day, Lily is fully in charge. And if they want to make a major structural decision she disagrees with? Another beat. He adjusted his cuff. "Well, that's why we have good legal documents. Everything is defined. She's protected." I said, "Donovan, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer me directly. Not the way you answer Lily. The way you'd answer someone who is 67 years old and has been watching people for 67 years. He went still. Just slightly. The smile stayed, but something behind his eyes recalculated. "Of course," he said. "After she signs today, is my granddaughter still in control of her company?" The pause was 3 seconds. I counted them. Then he said, "Mrs. Calloway, I understand the anxiety. This is a big step. But I promise you, Lily has reviewed everything with her own attorney." "Her own attorney," I said. "The one you recommended." Another small stillness. "We can go over every clause upstairs," he said. "Paul is very good at explaining the legal language in plain terms. I think once you see it all laid out." "I'd like to hear it from you," I said. "Not Paul, not the documents. You." I watched his face. I have watched faces for 67 years. I watched his decide. He stepped slightly closer. His voice dropped. Not threatening, just quieter. Intimate, almost. The voice of a man letting someone into a confidence. "Ruth," he said. First time he had ever used my first name. "This is the best thing for Lily. She's been running herself into the ground for 3 years. Distill brings in the resources she can't access alone. Will there be adjustments to the governance structure? Yes, that's how investment works. But she will be fine. I will make sure she is fine." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate you being honest." He nodded. Relieved. He thought that was the end of it. I reached into my cardigan pocket and stopped the recording. What happened next I have replayed many times, the way you replay things you want to make sure you remember correctly. I told Donovan I needed 1 more minute and asked him to give me some privacy with Gerald. He was gracious about it. He stepped away toward the elevator and scrolled through his phone. I looked at Gerald. He looked at me. I said, "Call Marcus." He had my son on the phone in 40 seconds. I told Marcus in short, clear sentences what Gerald had heard 4 days ago and what Donovan had just confirmed. Marcus asked 2 questions. Then he said, "Mom, don't let them start the signing. I'm calling David right now." David is our family attorney. He's been our attorney for 19 years. I said, come to the building, level 2, parking garage. Then I walked toward Donovan. I smiled and said I was ready to go up. We rode the elevator together, the three of us, and Donovan held the door and pressed the button for the 14th floor and made pleasant conversation about the traffic. I answered him. I was perfectly calm. I have no explanation for why I was so calm, except that once you know what you are walking into and you have done the one thing you could do, the anxiety goes somewhere. It just goes somewhere. The conference room was glass-walled, with a long table and a view of the city. Lily was already there, sitting with a folder in front of her. She lit up when she saw me. She came around the table and hugged me and said she was glad I came, and I held her a moment longer than usual, and I said I was glad too. Paul Renner was at the far end of the table, heavy-set, pleasant-faced, the kind of man you would trust precisely because he looks exactly like a man you're supposed to trust. He shook my hand and called me by name and said it was wonderful to finally meet the woman who built Callaway Fabrication. I said my husband built it. He said, of course, smiled. We all sat down. The attorney, Donovan's attorney, began laying out documents. He explained the structure in calm professional language. I watched Lily listen. She was nodding. She had clearly been through this before. She believed in it. I said, before we begin, I'd like everyone to hear something. The room shifted. Donovan looked up from his phone. Paul Renner's pleasant expression held steady, but his eyes focused. Lily said, Grandma? I took Gerald's phone from my pocket. I found the audio file. I pressed play. The first voice in that room that was not any of ours was Gerald's from the garage 8 minutes ago, and then Donovan's. After she signs Tuesday, we file the amended operating agreement and her vote gets diluted to nothing. She'll think she's still running it. A laugh. She trusts me completely. This is done. I watched Lily's face. I have seen my granddaughter cry twice in her adult life, once when Marcus had his heart attack and once when her dog died. She does not cry easily. She is 31 years of Callaway stubbornness, and she keeps things close. She went white, completely white. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, and she stared at Gerald's phone, and the color left her face the way it leaves a piece of paper that has been left in the sun too long. Donovan started talking. He was very good at it. I will give him that. He said the recording was out of context, that he could explain that Paul and he had simply been discussing a contingency scenario, a worst case that was never the intention. Lily said very quietly, "Stop talking." He stopped. She looked at the folder in front of her. She looked at Paul Renner, whose pleasant face was now doing something unpleasant around the edges. She looked at the attorney, who was looking at his own hands. Then she looked at me. She said, "How long have you known?" I said. "Gerald came to me yesterday morning. He told me what he'd heard last week. I didn't come to you directly because I knew you would ask him. You would ask Donovan, and I needed you to hear it for yourself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't find a better way." She nodded, slowly. Her jaw was set. She picked up the unsigned folder in front of her. She placed it at the center of the table. Then she stood up and said, "We're done here." Donovan reached for her arm and said her name. She looked at his hand on her arm. He let go. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with David. Donovan and Paul had already left. The attorney was packing up his files in what I can only describe as energetic silence. David sat down with Lily and me and Gerald, and we walked through what had happened and what the next steps would look like, legally. Lily asked every question herself. She did not cry in that room. She saved it, I think, for later, somewhere private, the way Callaway women do. That was 6 weeks ago. I know people want a clean ending. I know how these stories are supposed to go. The villain gets exactly what he deserves. The family is healed. Someone cries on a porch at sunset. I will tell you what actually happened, which is messier than that, and also, I think, more true. David filed a civil suit against Donovan Price and Paul Renner and the investment group on behalf of Callaway Fabrication. We turned over the recording and Gerald's testimony. 3 weeks later, through David, we learned that this was not the first time they had done this. There was another family in Ohio, a smaller company, a widower, a son who trusted the wrong consultant. That family's story did not end as well as ours. They had already signed. Lily has not spoken to Donovan since the conference room. I do not know what that silence costs her because she does not say and I do not ask. I know that she loved him or believed she did, and that those two things are sometimes the same and sometimes not, and that only she can know which it was. What I know is that she came to my house on a Sunday 3 weeks ago, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I sat alone at 2 in the morning with cold tea, and she put her head on my shoulder the way she did when she was 6, and she said, "I should have let you see the documents." I said, "You didn't know." She said, "I should have let you try." I held her hand. Outside my kitchen window, the maple tree in the backyard was going red at the edges the way it does every October. My husband planted that tree the year Lily's father was born. I said, "The company is still yours. That's what matters." She said, "It's ours, Grandma." And Gerald, I want to make sure I say this. At a family dinner 2 Sundays after everything came out, my son Marcus stood up and said a few words about what Gerald had done, about what it means to be loyal to a family for 22 years and to carry something hard for 4 days because you're trying to be certain before you bring someone pain. Marcus shook Gerald's hand. Lily hugged him. Gerald looked at the floor the whole time and said, "I just did what I should have done sooner." I told him afterward, quietly, that he did it exactly on time. I am 67 years old. I have buried a husband and raised children and kept a business alive and learned by now that wisdom is mostly just paying attention long enough that you start to see patterns. I paid attention to Donovan Price for 2 years, and something was always slightly off. Not broken, not obviously wrong, just off the way a note that's almost but not quite in tune is off, and you can ignore it until you can't anymore. I am glad I did not ignore it. I am glad I did not ignore it. I am glad Gerald didn't either. If you are listening to this and you have a feeling you've been trying to talk yourself out of, about a person, a deal, a situation where something keeps sitting wrong no matter how many reasons you find to let it go, I want you to sit with that feeling a little longer. Don't perform it, don't act on it carelessly, don't blow up someone's life over a hunch, but don't dismiss it either. Find the way to know for certain. Because the people who love you most are sometimes in the passenger seat, watching something you can't see from where you're driving. And if they tell you to pull over, it is worth, at minimum, stopping the car. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain, quiet version of it that you start to see clearly when you get older, and you have enough distance from enough events to watch the whole chain of them laid out. Donovan Price spent 2 years building something. He was patient about it. He studied Lily, studied our family, learned what we valued and what we feared and what we wanted for the business my husband spent his life on. He made himself necessary. He made himself trusted. And then, at the moment he calculated we were most vulnerable, Lily excited, the deal close, everyone looking forward instead of sideways, he moved. That is not bad luck on our part. That is a plan. And plans, when they are built on what other people do not know, have a specific kind of weakness. They depend entirely on the information staying contained. Gerald contained nothing. That is the whole story, really. One man who had been with our family for 22 years decided that his loyalty to us was worth more than his comfort. He could have stayed quiet. He had told himself for 4 days that maybe he misunderstood, maybe it was out of context, maybe it was not his place. That is a very human way to talk yourself out of doing a hard thing. And then he decided he could not live with the quiet, and he came to me, and that decision, that one quiet decision made by a man who is not rich or powerful or credentialed in any particular way, is the reason Lily still owns her company today. I think about that a lot. How the whole thing turned not on lawyers or money or any kind of formal power, but on one person choosing not to look away. What Donovan did not understand, and what men like him consistently underestimate, is that loyalty built over decades is not a soft thing. It does not bend easily. He saw Gerald as staff background, functional, not relevant to the real calculation. That was his mistake. The people who have watched your family through illness and loss and ordinary Tuesdays for 22 years are not background. They are the ones who will stand in a parking garage and hand you a running voice memo because they stayed up 3 nights over something they heard and could not make themselves forget. Lily is still working through what happened. She will not say much about Donovan directly, and I do not push her. I know that kind of processing takes the time it takes and cannot be rushed by someone else's timetable, even a grandmother's. What I see is that she has gotten sharper, not harder, sharper. There is a difference. She asks more questions now. She slows down at the moments when she used to move fast. She trusts herself, I think, in a new way, because she saw her own instincts confirmed, even painfully, and there is something clarifying about that. The company is doing well. She brought in a different consulting firm, one that Marcus's attorney vetted from the start. She is expanding, carefully, on her own terms. And Gerald still brings peppermint candies in the bowl on his dashboard. Some things stay the same. The ones worth keeping always do.